I don't think of them as anything different. To me, they're one and the same. Because rhythmically speaking, if you take the 8 bars of somebody rhyming, and if it's like on a high level, it's kind of very similar to some of the drum patterns that people like Kenny Clark and Philly Joe Jones and them were playing back in the day. Hip hop is jazz's great grandson. Check the rock.
Hip-hop is jazz's grandson. That's not just a quote. That's a lineage. When Roy Hargrove says that, he's not being poetic for the sake of it. He's naming bloodlines. He's pointing to something deeper than genre, deeper than marketing, deeper than streaming playlists. He's talking about inheritance. Because jazz was never just swing rhythms. It was improvisation as rebellion. It was taking limited resources and making it limitless expression. It was community. Cypher before cypher had a name. Solo before freestyle had a moniker. And then decades later, in parks and basements and Bronx rec rooms, hip-hop picked up the same spirit, just with different clothes. Turntables instead of trumpets, drum machines instead of drum kits, samples instead of standards, but the mindset was always jazz. In this video, we're tracing that family tree. We're talking about how improvisation connects jam sessions to ciphers, how swing translates into boom bap, how producers became modern-day band leaders, and how artists sampled the past, not to copy it, but to converse with it. Why musicians like Roy Hargrove didn't just observe hip-hop, they embraced it. This isn't about saying they're the same. It's about understanding how one raised the other. Because hip-hop isn't jazz's replacement. It's its continuation. And today, we're breaking down the DNA. Hey y'all, new setup. How you doing? I hope you're doing good. I am doing good. I'm doing very well. Thank you for telling me about my sound quality. I know it was really bad. I promise I never meant for it to be that way. I was recording like this because I was like, maybe that'll be like the best option for me. Clearly it was not. I don't know why I ever thought that. And then I found out my university has podcast rooms, so now I'm just gonna use that because it's pointless to do anything else really. While I'm on video, you ought to like and subscribe, hopefully. I don't usually say it, but my face is on here now, so I ought to say something about it probably. I really hope you enjoy the video. Like always, whatever I end up talking about in this video, if you have any sort of experiences with that at that time, or you want to share something, please leave it in the comments. I love having conversations with people about music. That's why I started this thing, is because music means so much to me, and I just really enjoy sharing it with other people. So please talk to me about anything that you see in this video that you think is interesting or wrong or right. And without further ado, enjoy the video. Thank you. At the start of the 20th century in New Orleans, black musicians gathered in parade lines and dance halls, Storyville clubs, and church pews, blending blues moans, ragtime syncopation, spirituals, and West African rhythmic memory into something the world had never heard before. They called it jazz. It wasn't written for concert halls, it wasn't born in conservatories, it wasn't academic. It came from the second lines winding through hot streets, from brass bands turning funerals into celebrations, from pianos slightly out of tune in backroom bars. Cornets cried, clarinets fluttered above them, trombones slid between notes like voices refusing to stay confined. Drums didn't just keep time, but they stretched it, because jazz was conversation. There was democracy in its sound. It was messy, it was responsive, it was alive. Everyone was listening. Everyone was contributing. No performance was the same twice. And underneath all of that was improvisation. Improvisation wasn't just some musical technique. It was philosophy. It was the ability to create in the moment, to take what you have and make something out of it. In a segregated America that restricted where black musicians could live, travel, eat, breathe, or perform, improvisation became survival, translated into sound. By the time jazz reached the 1940s, the music had moved north into Chicago, Kansas City, and Harlem. In clubs like Mitten's Playhouse, musicians began reshaping the language again. Enter Charlie Parker, enter Thelonious Monk, enter Dizzy Gillespie. Swing had been commercialized. Big bands were playing for mainstream audiences, while many of the black innovators behind the sound were underpaid and undercredited. Bebop was a reclamation, because the complexity was intentional, its speed was intentional, its virtuosity was intentional. It created a barrier that demanded respect. And even then, jazz wasn't about technical brilliance. It was about expression under pressure, a way of turning marginalization into movement. That spirit, which is defiant, it's inventive, it's communal, doesn't just stay in 1950s Harlem. It travels. Decades later, where new generations face new forms of pressure in different neighborhoods, that same instinct reappears. Different tools, but the same fire. And that is what gets passed down. By 1959, the world had already changed. I use that year as a simple marker because Miles Davis released Kind of Blue that year, a record that didn't just push harmony forward, but simplified it. Modal jazz stripped away dense chord changes and opened up space. Space to breathe, space to stretch, space to feel. And that space would echo for decades. Because once jazz had broken the harmonic ceiling, black music didn't need to prove complexity anymore. It could explore groove, texture, repetition, atmosphere. The lesson had been learned. Freedom in sound is possible. The question became, what do we do with it? In the late 60s and early 70s, the center of gravity shifted. We enter the revolution of funk, soul, and disco. James Brown locked into the one. The downbeat became a weapon. Horn stabs became rhythmic punctuation, and bass lines stopped walking and started talking. Rhythm was no longer just support, it was the foundation to this music. Because funk was disciplined minimalism, it was tight, it was cyclical, and it was hypnotic. If bebop was complexity as resistance, funk was groove as authority. In the soul scene, Aretha Franklin turned gospel power into secular testimony. Marvin Gaye asked political questions over lush orchestration. Stevie Wonder fused jazz harmony, pop structure, and synthesizers into futuristic sound. Again, not background music, social commentary wrapped in melody. On the floor of disco, Donna Summer used the four-on-the-floor drums, orchestration, and dance floor ecstasy to make clubs sanctuaries for black communities, for queer communities, for anyone needing liberation through rhythm. It was like rebellion and glitter. And like jazz before it, funk, disco, and soul had all built their communities in physical space. But something else was happening. Technology. Electric bass replaced the upright. Synthesizers, not necessarily replaced, but certainly added on to the sounds of pianos. Drum machines began to appear. Studio production became its own art form. Ask Quincy Jones. Albums stopped sounding like rooms, they started sounding like worlds. Producers began layering textures, isolated grooves, and stretching sections longer than tradition usually allowed. Funk vamps would ride for minutes. Disco breakdowns would loop into trance. Repetition became powerful, and repetition is the foundation of hip-hop. By the late 1970s, a kid in the Bronx didn't need a full band to access this history. All he needed was records. Funk records had clean drum breaks. Soul records had isolated bass intros. Disco records had extended instrumental sections. Even jazz records had mood and atmosphere. Everything was now recorded, pressed, and circulating. And when DJ Kool Herc started looping breakbeats, he wasn't inventing groove, he was just isolating it. When early hip-hop producers began sampling, they weren't rejecting live musicianship, they were just recontextualizing it. If you ever wonder why hip-hop sounds so heavy from the drums, is because those sounds come from funk. Or why bass lines feel warm is because they come from soul. That Motown sound very heavily impacted how hip-hop was going to be formed in the 80s. The reason jazz rap in the 90s sounds spacious is because of those modal lessons learned from Kind of Blue. Even disco's extended structure influences hip-hop's understanding of the dance floor, how rhythm controls bodies, how repetition builds community. Black music became modular. Grooves could be looped, breaks could be isolated, intros could be extended. And once that possibility existed, hip-hop was inevitable. From the creation by DJ Kool Herc of hip-hop into the mid-1980s, hip-hop did not just inherit the spirit of jazz, but it started going back for the sound. Producers began digging through crates, pulling out dusty jazz records, isolating 4 bars and turning it into something cyclical. And those loops weren't random. They were chosen because they felt like lineage. Listen to Jazz by A Tribe Called Quest. It's also called We've Got It.
Check what out? Yo, check this out. Yo, microphone check 1, 2, what is this? The 5-foot assassin with the roughneck business. I float like gravity, never had a cavity. Got more rhymes than the one that's got family. No need to sweat our symbiotes to gain some type.
The upright bass line is warm, it's walking, it's patient. The drums, they kind of swing, they don't slam. Or take Words I Manifest by Gang Starr, another huge influencer of the jazz rap era. DJ Premier chops jazz piano chords into a sharp rhythmic statement. It's like comping behind an MC the way a pianist would comp behind a soloist. It's minimal, it's head nod swing, it's conversational. Because they weren't accidents, they were intentional callbacks. Here's the key shift. Jazz improvises horizontally. It moves through chord changes, right? Naturally, if you've heard any jazz song. But hip-hop improvises vertically. They stay on one loop and they explore it rhythmically. The heart of hip-hop comes from people freestyling in someone's basement. It comes from the feeling of having something that you know is going to be there, that 4-bar jazz sample becoming a hypnotic cycle. That MC now gets to improvise rhythmically and lyrically within that loop. Don't be confused. That repetition isn't limitation, it's canvas. In that way, hip-hop turns jazz harmony into groove architecture. And by the mid-90s, this lineage becomes undeniable. The Roots emerge playing live instruments, blending rap with jazz musicianship. Common raps over lush, jazz-informed production, producers treat samples like horn sections, layering textures instead of just chopping drums. Hip-hop was no longer just borrowing anymore. It was studying the family tree. Then come in the late 90s. A loose collective formed around Electric Lady Studios in New York, the Soulquarians. Members included D'Angelo, Questlove, Erykah Badu, Roy Hargrove, Common, Mos Def, and producer Jay Dilla. What they did between 1999 and about 2005 was revolutionary. They took jazz looseness, they took that soul warmth, the hip-hop rhythms, and they blurred the lines completely. Listen to Voodoo by D'Angelo. The drums are slightly behind the beat. The groove feels human, it feels imperfect, it feels breathing. Questlove's playing channels the looseness of jazz drummers. That feeling comes from Jay Dilla's production, which shifts time subtly, creating what musicians now call Dilla time. It swings without swinging traditionally, it's pocket-based improvisation. Commons like Water for Chocolate, heavily shaped by Jay Dilla, feels like a modern jazz record disguised as hip-hop. Extended grooves, live instrumentation, improvisational textures, layered into structured songs. The Soulquarians didn't just sample jazz nostalgically, they internalized it. They recorded together live, they jammed, they layered instruments in a way a band would. They treated the studio like a rehearsal space instead of a factory. By the early 2000s, the cycle was complete. Jazz had influenced funk and soul had influenced hip-hop. Hip-hop circled back and reanimated jazz sensibilities through production, through groove, and through collaboration. The cyclical groove, that hypnotic repetition at the core of hip-hop, became the new modal space. Instead of Miles Davis holding the space over 2 chords, an MC now held space over 4 bars. Different tools, but the same inheritance. And then we arrive at now, because the story doesn't end in the 2000s, it evolves. In 2015, Kendrick Lamar releases To Pimp a Butterfly. And suddenly the lineage isn't subtle anymore. It's front and center. Live bass, extended vamps, horn arrangements by the great Terrace Martin that feel like spiritual jazz. Musicians stretching sections the way a band would in a club instead of a studio booth. Because he didn't sample jazz, he invited it in. Players like Kamasi Washington and Robert Glasper helped build a record that feels as indebted to 1970s black improvisational music as it does to modern rap. Tracks breathe, they expand. They feel less like loops and more like conversations. And Kendrick's flow? It shifts cadence the way a soloist shifts phrasing. He bends rhythm, he plays behind the beat, he accelerates, he pauses, he explodes. That's jazz language translated into rap performance. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The influence isn't one-directional. Jazz musicians today grew up on hip-hop. Robert Glasper doesn't treat hip-hop as an experiment, but foundational to his sound. His chords may be rooted in Herbie Hancock, but his pocket is understandably Jay Dilla. His phrasing leaves space the way an MC leaves space between bars. Listen to the Black Radio Experience. Joshua Redman incorporates groove-based repetition and rhythmic sensibilities that feel closer to hip-hop production than traditional bebop sprinting. Modern jazz records often lock into cyclical patterns, allowing improvisation to happen over sustained grooves, like a rapper rides a beat. Yusuf Days, Venna, Jack James, they're all examples in the UK scene of this exact phenomenon happening. Younger scenes blur the lines entirely. Producers jam with instrumentalists. Jazz players loop themselves. Rappers perform with live bands that swing and sway instead of quantize and click. Everybody has grown up. Jazz taught hip-hop improvisation, groove, and fearless expression. Hip-hop taught jazz further minimalism, loop-based hypnosis, and a new rhythmic pocket. Both remained rooted in Black creativity. Both remained tools for storytelling under pressure. Both continue to adapt to technology without losing spirit. So when Roy Hargrove says that hip-hop is jazz's grandson, he was naming lineage, but that lineage isn't static. It's a conversation. And that conversation is still happening in studios, on stages, and ciphers, and jam sessions. Different generations, same pulse, same insistence, same swing. Just translated. And that's why this story isn't nostalgia. It's not looking on a world that once was. It's a world that is. Thanks for watching.